Her Journey to Healing, Reaching Women with a Desperate Cry is an 8-week Zoom seminar in which Kamala and Winston help women to start living their best life by rediscovering the image of God in their life. Kamala, a licensed marriage and family therapist, joins her husband of 16 years, an ordained pastor, to marry the clinical and the spiritual. You will begin living your best life filled with love, joy, and peace. Register at kwministries.net for this life-changing seminar.
The thing about that too, the mistake that I make often is try to love Kamala the way I want to be loved. Now, you know that's not love. That's me doing something to get something. Let me say it again. When you try to love someone the way you receive love. So for example, if I hear some good news and I get excited, I get really, really excited. And so if somebody tells me good news, I'm going to get excited. I'm going to get excited with that. And then I get mad because they're not getting excited. Well, that's really selfish. That's not reaching the person where they need to be met, but rather reaching the person where I need to be met in hopes of getting something in return. Mm-hmm.
You know, we in the therapy world like to feel like we know a lot of stuff, right? And so we talk about all kinds of different concepts, and we've done it all along the way. But nothing that we talk about is new as it relates to the Word of God. Here we are talking about how God is coming to get us, how we get to be now physically, not just mentally, a part of something.
Yes, Lord.
And so this was a concept that Maslow talked about a long time ago, love and belonging. He had this great hierarchy of needs, and if you've got safety and security, you've got shelter, you've got all of those things, then once you have that secure foundation, then you can focus on love and belonging. But here it is that God is saying you already belong. You don't have to worry about love and belonging in the way that Maslow talked about it. But the interesting thing is, just in the same way that Maslow identified that love and belonging is something that we need to thrive as human beings, here's where we're saying to you that, yeah, we agree. We do need love and belonging to thrive as human beings. We do need love and belonging to be able to experience care and compassion and empathy and having a place in the world. We do need love and belonging to be part of community. And guess where?
In the kingdom of God. Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Live with KW. Because if it's Monday night, you're live with
KW and
Jay.
We're excited to be here with you this evening. We're excited about the discussion that we will have. But it's Monday. And because it's Monday, we're celebrating. And I'm interested to know what my co-hosts are celebrating tonight. Kamala, what are you celebrating?
I am celebrating just the opportunity to be alive. Might seem like something that you shouldn't pause and talk about, but there's so many people, so many families, so many situations where we're not celebrating life today. So I'd like to celebrate life.
That's right. That's right. I'm celebrating life with you. Pastor Gibson, what are you celebrating on this Monday evening?
Celebrating just peace. Just having peace, sometimes we can be so disturbed by so many things. Today, I'm just at peace. So I'm celebrating that today.
I think peace is where we're all attaining to. I think that the idea of being at peace is what every single human, we may not know it, but I think that's what all of us as human beings are striving for, or working for, or living for. Is to be able to just not be bothered. I'm celebrating chances. What I mean by that, I'm celebrating the ability to enjoy things that I gave up I don't know if right is the right word, but I gave up I messed up, but I'm still able to enjoy those things. And I'm celebrating chances. In the church, we call it grace and mercy. That's what I'm celebrating tonight. So I'm grateful to God. We want to say welcome to those of you who have joined us, whatever site you're joining us from, whether it's Cedar Grove Church YouTube channel, or KW Ministries YouTube channel, or any of the Facebook pages. I don't think anybody's in the store where Kamala is going to send you in a second. But we want to welcome you. Thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. And we want to know what you're celebrating on this Monday as we have this conversation. What are we doing here on Monday nights?
So on Mondays, guys, we are here to have conversation. We're also here to send you shopping. So two things. On Monday nights, we like to get together and just talk to different people about their lives. We started doing this a couple of years ago, and we have had
means two.
Well, 3 at this point.
Almost 4 years.
Yep. So, and we have discovered that just by virtue of being able to have conversation with people, that there is so much more that connects us. And there's so many ways in which we can inspire and help each other as we're all going through this journey called life. So that's the one thing that we're doing. The second thing that we're doing is that we're keeping shop. So I'm going to send you over to www.kwministries.net/shop. And we want for you to check out what's on our site.
We have some really, really, really cool stuff.
Yes, we do.
Adult coloring book.
Yeah.
Releases. This is done by Annike Fagan, our producer. She's the one that really runs everything.
This is true.
We wouldn't know how to do anything. But she has a coloring book in there for adults that helps to release stress. And I think it's free. No,
the coloring book isn't free, but
it's like $1. It's not expensive at all.
It's very inexpensive.
And I recommend that to you if you're just going through some challenging time and you just want something to distract you. Get in there and grab a coloring book for adults. Not adults as in not children appropriate. It's very much children appropriate, but it's adults as in adult themes.
Yes. So, guys, one of the things that we just talked about is this idea of celebrating Monday. And we're being very intentional about that. If you're joining us for the first time, Monday can feel like the Monday blues. And we're trying to revamp that by encouraging each other to find something to celebrate, because we know the more we celebrate is the more inclined we are to look for positivity in our lives.
It doesn't mean nothing negative happened.
No,
It doesn't mean you didn't have a bad day.
No.
It just means we're finding something.
We are being intentional.
We're being intentional.
Finding some light at the end of a tunnel.
Finding some light at the end of the tunnel. We're excited. We're happy to have Pastor Gibson as usual. We're very grateful. And tonight we have a guest. Tonight we have a subject that I think you are going to benefit from greatly. I think you're going to learn. I think you will walk away from our discussion tonight being empathetic. I believe you'll walk away from our discussion tonight being informed. I think you'll walk away from our discussion tonight just understanding different people, different in a better way, and different just simply mean not like you. So I'm excited. Can you introduce our guest tonight?
All
Dr.
right.
Taylor?
Joining us tonight is Michael Smith, not to be confused with Michael W. Smith, the singer. Michael Smith, CBA, board certified analyst. And just a little bit about Michael's background. He was an active advocate for persons with autism. And he started out of this place called the Grace Respite, which was a ministry to children with intellectual disabilities and their families at his church in 2009. He volunteered in that ministry alongside his family and served for many years before deciding to leave his pastorate and pursue applied behavioral analysis as a career. And so he applied to school, studied applied behavioral analysis with an emphasis in ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And he is, like I said, a board certified behavior analyst. And he is with us tonight for us to explore this topic, its implications on individuals, families, and how we can, as a community, support and guide.
Before we even start our discussion, Michael, please meet Pastor Gibson. He pastors the Philadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church. He's also a social worker. So it's 3 against 1 tonight, but it's also 3 against 1 because Michael is also a pastor. So it's 3 against you.
Anywhere you go.
And then it's 3 against me.
We can sing that old Sesame Street song. 3 of these things belong together. 3 of these things are one and the same.
So we're going to see how we work it out tonight. But Michael, would you share with us something that you're celebrating today before we even get started?
Oh, celebrating today. I survived the DMV today.
Congratulations.
Which is cause to celebrate.
That is.
Yeah.
No, that is. We have been trying to survive them for a year and however long we've been here. We haven't been successful yet. So that is something to celebrate. So we're celebrating with you.
Thank you.
We're celebrating with you. But Kamala, you're going to lead us in our discussion tonight.
All right. So this is a conversation. So Michael, just to get us started, you know, your bio talks about the initial work that you did with Grace Respite. And I'm curious because to me that signaled the beginning of things as it related to working with autism spectrum disorder. So I'm curious about what prompted that in those very early stages.
So even before I was pastor of a local church here in Shreveport, I'd been a student minister for years, and a family joined our church who had a 7-year-old child who had autism. And she was bold and really asked for support. And so that's the first time I'd ever actually been involved with a child or anyone with autism, honestly. And
Michael, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to interrupt you for a quick second. And this is going to happen throughout the night, so get used to it.
Okay.
But, Annika, I think we found our first hashtag. Ask for support.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let that just pass by.
Yes,
He
I
said
hear
that the folk walked into his church. They had an autistic child, and the mother was bold enough to ask for support. I just want to highlight that as we go.
Yeah, I think that, this has been, I was still in my 20s, so it's been a long time ago. But yeah, she asked for support, and so we as a church began to take turns keeping him for her so she could go to a worship service. I did, and several others. And now we'll talk about spectrum in a minute. He was on the end of the spectrum with a lot of deficits. He was nonverbal, a lot of repetitive behavior, pacing, hand flapping. But, at that time, it just kind of dawned on me that had she not been bold enough to ask for support, we would have missed that opportunity as a church. I don't think it was ever anything intentional on the part of the church membership, right? It's just not being aware of that need. And if she had not reached out and began to kind of educate us, we would have missed that opportunity. And so you spring forward several years. We're in Shreveport now, and my wife and I and our 3 children. And I came as a student minister, became associate pastor, and then I became a pastor. And while I was an associate pastor, I had the opportunity to launch and create a lot of new ministries in the life of the church. And there was another family in our church that, again, they had a special needs child. And they would she came to me as associate pastor and said, I would really like to see us have a ministry for these children with special needs, but also for the families.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And so as we began to kind of research and kind of look into that process, we learned a lot. I learned a lot. Mm-hmm. I learned that families with children with special needs are some of the most isolated families in society. I learned that a lot of times, even if they ask for help and even if they can educate family members and friends on how to deal with, maybe some of the problem behaviors and deficits that come with a child with special needs, that there's also a lot of guilt and fear with leaving those children because there's a lot of medical need. And so we had to start checking off all of those concerns to be able to offer this respite, one Friday night a month for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we found was we were going to need to not just keep children with special needs, we were going to have to keep their neurotypical children as well. Because if we didn't do the whole family, mom and dad didn't really get a break, right? Mm-hmm. So we got partnered with Willis Knight and South, and they donated a crash cart to the church so that we would have all of those. So we always had a doctor on staff. And I just kind of began to really connect with these families. I think that was a big part of the respite, was not just the fact that they got this break, right? But they could feel safe and comfortable with the quality of care that we were providing. Mm-hmm. But I think more than anything, they enjoyed that drop-off time, that conversation and that communication, and then that pickup time, right? Because these were people, the volunteers and the ministers who worked in this ministry, these were people who they could talk about other things with, and also talk with people who understood kind of what they were going through in their day-to-day life, even if it was just a small window. But that was just something that a need that was met, just that touch, that verbal, communication, that catching up, how was their week? How was your child's week at school? Or, what's going on with them now? Or this is the current medical need that we're having. Can we pray about this? Can we talk about this? And it just became, just kind of a life-changing experience for me, particularly. And my family as well, I think.
Now, Michael, how was the transition for the church? How was that? How did the church mesh into that or gel into that thought process? That as you all saw that need, how did the church make the adjustment to now
minister in that way?
Minister in that way, yeah.
So initially, it was not an easy transition. It was kind of like what I found early on in ministry when this family comes and says, we need some support and help. When we began to talk about it as a church and go through the right channels and how do we, organize for this, and, what are the extra concerns about using the facility in this way, and then how do we get it all clean for the weekend services and just the nuts and bolts. There were some people that felt a real concern about being overwhelmed with too many all at one time. And it wasn't a concern that we don't want them here. The concern
was just hard.
Yeah, it's going to be more than we can deal with, and we're not Jesus, right? You give us 5 loaves and some fishes, and we can't do the miraculous. But we just pressed on through that and ahead and started that ministry. And then what kind of from that was, as people volunteered, they began to feel some of that very same sense. And so in the time that I was there, we always had enough volunteers. And what we did too is we allowed volunteers to come in from the community, not just members of our church, but other people with that interest, and some in some cases family members of these families, because this allowed them an opportunity to care for their a brother or a sister who had a special needs child, within a context of having some people around that could kind of coach them through, knowing that they didn't have that anxiety of being completely responsible by themselves for any specific medical need, or getting just the support that they needed to be able to support the needs of those individuals that they cared about, those friends in their community.
So we're going to pick up back this part of the conversation about the church on the back end, because between Jimmy and I, we could spend all night asking you to help us create ministries in our churches for it and not get out the information. So we're going to pick up back how we can, because that's one of my questions, is how can we in our local churches create ministries to support these families? But let's talk about the families first.
I was kind of thinking, let's maybe start with a definition.
Right.
So for the viewing honest member who doesn't know much about autism spectrum disorder or special needs, what would be a working definition that we could start with for autism spectrum disorder?
So autism spectrum disorder is a clinical term for individuals who have deficits in social communication. Either they're nonverbal, or there's just a breakdown in how they communicate socially, or 2, have fixed and repetitive interests and behaviors that become, we call it stereotypy. And so, and the reason why it's important to kind of understand it in terms of a spectrum. So let's just take social communication, verbal communication. On the end of the spectrum that requires the most support, you may have someone who does not speak at all, right? They may not be able to communicate. And then all the way to the other end of the spectrum, you may have an individual who they developed speech at an appropriate at appropriate age, appropriate intervals, but they have very fixed interests, and so now they have this struggle with communicating with someone else because their interests are not neurotypical, and maybe they can't stop fixating or thinking about whatever it is that is their specific interest. And so, you can fall anywhere in between there. And then when it comes, let's say, looking at from a spectrum perspective, for like stereo. Okay, let me back up. Fixed movements. That's a hard word to say. All the way over on the end of the spectrum where they need the most support, you may have an individual or a child who is constantly moving, constantly hand flapping, or even self-injurious behavior. They're hitting themselves in the face or headbutting. And then you get all the way to this other end, and it may just be that this child, what they want to do is they want to line their Matchbox cars up in a row. And they can do that for hours and hours and hours unless somebody touches them and puts them out of order. And then they may become distressed. I don't know if that helps, but I mean, that's really one of the things that a goal that I have is that I really want people to be informed about what autism is and also what it isn't, because there's this idea that every individual with autism, every child with autism has all of these same characteristics. They are the same in the sense that there's this struggle with social communication and this struggle with repetitive movements and behaviors, but it can be very varied all in there.
So again, if you're just joining us, which I saw some folk just pop on, we're talking to Mr. Michael Smith about autism. Please feel free to ask your questions. He has just defined autism and explaining to us that there is no one thing that you're looking for, but we're discussing a spectrum of things, all the way from speech might be developed, but there might be fixations on different things which can cause distress if interrupted, all the way to none, where a child is not communicating at all. A quick question I want to ask you, sir, is, so we talked about non-communication. Does a hearing impaired and speech impaired person considered autistic? The hearing impaired and speech impediment?
No, because and we don't know exactly why this is, but someone who is hearing impaired, there is actual physiological issue with maybe a deformity or but with autism, it is not necessarily about what they hear. It's about how they process that information. And it can be, where there are these deficits, you have to really get to know that patient. You really have to observe some behavior to kind of figure out, is there this deficit in auditory, in what they hear and what they say. And some individuals with autism have described, who have this auditory struggle, have described it as what they hear being just a fraction of a second off from what a neurotypical person would hear. And so sometimes with those kind of issues, they develop deficits in developing speech communication because it's difficult to learn. So mom maybe give me the toy car, and by the time that has been processed in the mind of that child, she's pointed to a banana and said, here's a banana. And so the delay when she's handing the banana is, this is a car. So it creates a lot of that. Some individuals have described, just visual distortions like flashing lights. And then some of it is just the way I try to describe it to people a lot of times is autism is an issue of perceiving the environment and the world around you in a way that is different than everybody else. And so physiologically, we know now that individuals with autism have more white matter in the brain, and that white matter may cause some of that delay in processing some of these things.
Michael, what are some of the most common things that you have seen come up in individuals and families who have family members with autism spectrum disorder, in terms of, here are the things that the family comes in because they're finding this to be problematic and they don't know how to deal with that? What are some of the things that you found to be most common?
So if you're talking early intervention, and if you're talking early intervention, a lot of times you're dealing with a lot of SIB, self-injurious behaviors, and a lot of tantrum behavior, a lot of aggression, hitting, falling to the floor, crying, kicking. Imagine, we've all seen a 2-year-old tantrum, but what happens is that tantruming doesn't stop. They get to be 4, 5, and it's not bad parenting, right?
Hold on, pause.
Okay.
Autism is not a result of bad parenting.
I like that.
Autism is not the professional said, autism, stop blaming yourself. Stop feeling guilty about this. Autism is not a result of bad parenting.
That's right. This behavior is because there is something that this child needs or wants that they're not able to understand or receive because of the way they process information. And so in early intervention, a lot of times what happens is when you figure out what those deficits are and you begin through repetition in what we applied behavior analysis and ABA therapy in a clinic setting, you begin to develop those communication skills. You begin to develop that ability to ask for what they need, to be able to kind of function in a way a little more neurotypically, particularly in terms of communication. A lot of times you see those behaviors go down and be diminished as the child is able to actually access what they need or want in a more neurotypical way. So a lot of times you see a lot of tantrum and SIB, self-injurious behavior, because that child is frustrated and hasn't figured out or they haven't learned to communicate in the same way that most children do. And so family gets very tense, right? And they're always anticipating the need of this child, offering stuff, and not expecting the child to communicate what they need. They're trying to figure it out for them. And so a lot of times with families and early intervention, I find that you also have to teach new behaviors to the family as well, because they figure out how to survive with this child and trying to tiptoe around all the things that trigger potentially this problem behavior.
Mhm.
Michael, I worked in early intervention in Philadelphia for 5 years.
Mhm.
What we did find is a lot of what you were saying is just that you kind of get overwhelmed with things. And so it's
Yep.
birth to three. The program is usually birth to three. What is, if you don't have, everybody doesn't have the flapping. Everybody doesn't have the
Right.
repetitive movements and things of that nature. What are some of the things that, as our parents are talking with their pediatricians or talking with their child development centers, are there things that can be discussed in those areas that can help parents begin to navigate, and tools and instruments that can be utilized for them?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that I would say to a parent of a child birth to three, right, even 4 or 5, is don't be afraid of an autism diagnosis. I'm not saying be happy about it. I'm not saying expect it. I'm saying, particularly when it comes to early intervention, I've seen some families and some parents who can't deal with the idea of this. They go to a negative place right off the bat. They may even avoid addressing the issue or talking about the subject. And, we know that the earlier these children are diagnosed, the sooner you can start working on these deficits and teaching these communication skills and helping them kind of maneuver a lot of those areas that are different for them. And the earlier you start that, the more effective that those therapies are for these children.
So don't, here we go, Annie. Don't be afraid of an autism diagnosis.
Yes.
Do not be afraid. And there are reasons for this. And, let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
We parents feel ashamed. We parents compare our children to other people's children.
Yeah.
But that's where the bad parenting come in.
Yeah.
So let's do some real talk and some real work here. That's where the bad, if I'm ashamed, if I have an autistic child, and because of my own pride, my own shame, my own fear, my own emotional stuff, I don't seek the help at an early intervention when I notice things. That's where the bad parenting comes in, because then I'm hurting the child for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think early intervention, and I think Michael will go into it more, is that early intervention is a teaching model. It's a model. It's not a medical model, but it's a teaching model that it teaches parents how to be a speech therapist. It teaches a parent how to be a physical therapist. It teaches a parent how to be an occupational therapist. It's not that they're going to be certified in OT, PT, and speech, but it does help them begin to understand some of the things, because as you're doing ASD services, you may have services 1 hour a day for every day of the week, Monday through Friday. But for the other 24 hours, the child still needs to have some type of parents. And so, and can you go into that a little bit as well, how that helps?
Well, to kind of go back to another thing that kind of leads up to that, don't be afraid of that diagnosis, but also you're going to see your pediatrician regularly. And one of the things that we do, that pediatricians do, is they're weighing that child. They're looking to see if that child is progressing, right, or if they're underweight or whatever. And so your pediatrician can be can give a lot of support in determining if this child needs additional testing for ASD, right, or for autism. If they're not meeting all of their developmental milestones, if there's fine motor skill issues, if they're not developing speech, fill in, I would say to the parent, fill in the rest of that with, my child is continuously crying and upset. Okay. If you're sharing that and then we don't find any medical reason for that, and maybe there's some of these other factors that your pediatrician is keeping a record of as your child grows and develops, those are all clues that could mean that you want to go ahead and figure out, get that extra testing, go ahead and determine. And then early intervention in terms of ABA is exactly what you're talking about. If your child is diagnosed with autism, one of the things that they're going to look for is, where are they on the spectrum? Are they a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3? Level 1 is not requiring tons of support, and level 3 is requiring a lot of support. And based on how much support they feel like that child may need, they may have 15 to 20 hours of therapy in an ABA clinic. But the thing, Pastor, that you spoke to that is so important is, and I've seen this many times over, you want your child to receive ABA therapy in a clinic that puts a strong emphasis on exactly what you were talking about: supporting the parent, teaching them the interventions that are specific to their child's needs, right? Teaching them how to what we would call generalize in the field of behavior analysis, generalize the same behaviors in the home setting that we're seeing in the clinic setting. And if that's not happening, if that clinic is not supporting the family and learning those things, then what happens is the child's behaviors only beneficial to them in that clinic setting. And with older kids in the setting I'm in now, working with older children, 10, 11, anywhere between the ages of 5 and 7, I see the consequence of
delay.
Even some kids who've been in ABA and have done well in that setting, but mom and dad were not brought into that loop. Mom and dad were not taught how to implement those same things. And now the child is regressing in some problem behaviors, but they're also getting physically stronger, larger. They start engaging these behaviors, and mom and dad don't know what to do, right? And so that's an important, just a huge part of it, is just really helping families. In ABA therapy for children with autism, it is you're never just a therapist to the child. You're a therapist to the child. You're a therapist to the father. You're a therapist to the mother, to the siblings, and in a lot of cases, hopefully grandparents. The joke that we always had in the ABA clinic was, please don't have grandma and grandpa come to visit. Because grandma and grandpa can undo everything that we've done.
That you're trying to do.
And they give in. That are not helpful to these children therapeutically sometimes. So you gotta teach the parents and the grandparents and the children.
Hey, Sister Glenn, so happy that you've joined us on tonight after a long time, as you said. She's saying, so what she's hearing you say is that support for both the autistic child or children and parents are key to the development of the child.
Absolutely. Totally. So if a child has autism, they're perceiving the world around them differently than a neurotypical child does. They may have deficits in the way they communicate or what they understand about communication. So think of it a little bit like they're a child from another country and another culture, and everything's a little bit different where they're from, and now you've partnered them into this family. If you don't understand something about the culture that they've come from, some of the issues that they face in that in that culture, how do you support and help the child, right? You've got to be able to know your child, know what their strengths are, know where their deficits are, and meet those challenges.
I like the way you put that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What my question was going to be was, so I'm a parent with a recent diagnosis. I found out that my child is indeed.
Let me go before you.
You want to go?
Yeah, let me go before you.
Yeah.
Are there known genetics and environmental or other factors? And I heard you talk about the white matter earlier, but now are there known environmental factor, genetic factors that contribute to the development of autism in a person?
So there are various opinions, but not enough research to know exactly. We know that there is a genetic connection because you often see in families, if one child has autism, often another sibling has autism. So there's that genetic connection. How that plays out, I don't think they really know at this point. I don't know that the environment really has much to do with actually having autism, but I think if the environment is not what it needs to be, I think it intensifies the problem behavior and the deficit, right? But we still don't know exactly what causes autism.
And right, but what we're saying, what I hear you say, just to echo you, that even if there's not a physical cause, environmental cause, if environment is not right, is not safe, is not, that will contribute, that will be triggering, that will be contributory to the effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
If I could expand on that, that makes me think of this. So you talked earlier about the importance of having parental involvement, sometimes grandparents' involvement, just because of all the people that are involved.
Remember, the grandparents can mess it up if they're not taught.
That's exactly where I'm going with it. What are some things, Michael, that you've seen over your years working with autism spectrum and families? What are some things that you have seen that can potentially derail the work that family is doing, the things that you're putting in place that cause you to get away from success?
I think that, there's several factors. I think that extended family that don't understand very specifically, for instance, a child with autism, grandma and grandpa come in and they spoil the child for a day or two, and then that child resets in a lot of situations. But with these kiddos, because of the intensity of their deficits, it may take them a while to reset. So I think involving, extended family, anyone who's going to be interacting with that child needs to really understand, what is important to do and not do with this child. I think if it's a family that has faith and is a part of the church, I think that really asking of the church, hey, what can we expect when we're a part of this family, this church family? But also for those who are in the church and hearing the need, I think we need to be really careful about not assuming we know exactly what that looks like. Right? The family. What do you need? How can I support you? And then listen to them describe not just what they need, but to give instruction about how that might be, how you might go about that. I think families who have children with autism feel judged a lot in public, and maybe even in their private relationships, because they don't understand in what looks like just a bad tantrum is really something so much more. And so people are kind of like, why don't you get your child in check? Right. They don't understand how difficult that is in these situations. I think one of the things that the same thing can be true about when the child starts school is if you're a parent with a child with an ASD diagnosis, being proactive about finding out who is going to be my child's teacher, because not every child with autism is going to end up in a special education class. A lot of them may end up in a regular or a general class, and they still have these deficits, but they can keep up academically. And sometimes it's harder on those kids because people don't always understand what's going on with them. They've got good grades, but they're odd from their perspective.
You were going to ask, I see Sister Glenn's question over there, and I'm coming to it, but you were going to ask something before I said.
So my previous question was going to be, so I'm a parent and I've just got this recent diagnosis of my child having autism. What do I expect when I walk into this ABA clinic? What do I expect?
So there's some resources that I think are really helpful. One that I would recommend is get online and go to Autism Speaks, which is one of the first, they're kind of the cutting edge of those parent education, family education resources, and of course research, and do a lot of things. And I recommend their website, because if you go to their website, they have actual tutorials about a lot of these subjects that we're talking about, but they have a what to expect from an ABA clinic, right? And so this is what I would expect if I were going through it myself. I would start by looking at what are the clinics in my area. I would, seek out, look at, ratings and just, a lot of information about those clinics. As you can't trust everything that you hear. So you want to check that out yourself. But the first thing that you would expect is that you would expect to call and set up an appointment to come and meet with a BCBA and to do that initial assessment. I would say what I think I could say better than what to expect is what to do if some things don't happen. How to know when to go someplace else.
Okay. If
they don't have some type of parent training as a part of what they're going to provide, right? That's not where you want to be, because people.
And the parent training is important. So that the same thing that's happening at the clinic is happening at home.
That's exactly right. If they're completely, and a lot of times in ABA, they can get very focused on just the academic aspect of ASD. And that's not enough, because a child who can catch up academically may do well academically for a while, but it's what we call masking. They may have to, they've observed behaviors, they've learned what's expected, and they mask a lot of what we would call neurotypical or normal behaviors, so that they are able to function in the school setting, right, and function academically. And sooner or later, that wears them out. and emotionally they get to a place where that anxiety and that stress becomes more than they can handle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I would want to look for an ABA clinic that demonstrated some type of balance between problem behaviors and academics. And Pastor, one of the things that you had talked about earlier too, in terms of early intervention, is does that clinic have occupational therapies? Does it have speech there? I mean, the more holistic that
Mm-hmm.
is,
Mm-hmm.
the better I think it would be for my child if I had a child with ASD.
Now, real quick, Mr. Michael, in Shreveport, do they have it that they not only do you have the clinic that you can go to, do they have it for the in-home services as well?
Yes. There are some in-home services. It's somewhat limited in this area. Unfortunately, actually, services are pretty limited in a lot of places.
It's hard work.
It is hard work. The East Coast and the West Coast, and Dallas and Chicago in the middle. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
those are the best places.
Mm.
So with that in mind, one of the things that I would say to a family who just had an ASD diagnosis, what would be some encouragement, as of 2020, the CDC states that 1 in 36 children today
Mm-hmm.
are likely to have an ASD diagnosis. Someone has autism
Mm-hmm.
or is dealing with something similar. So don't be ashamed. Don't feel guilty. Don't be prideful.
Mm-hmm.
Ask those questions of the people around you and find that community. And then the thing that I try to remind families of who've just received that diagnosis is, well, I talked some about recently radical acceptance from dialectical behavioral therapy of I can't move forward, I can't have hope, I don't look at and accept my reality as it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's only that in accepting that wholly and totally that I can then begin to put energy into learning new behaviors or new habits, but also just kind of focusing on my strengths. And so what I've tried to remind a lot of families of, a lot of parents of, is when they get this diagnosis or when they're looking for how do I follow through with these ABA therapies, is to remember that they can, just because their child has an ASD diagnosis and they're not quote unquote normal, what that child's life looks like is just as uncertain as if you have a neurotypical child.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
We say neurotypical is normal, but there is no normal.
Right.
There's a range that we look at academically, physically, socially, income. We have all of these ranges for normal, but the reality is that whether your child has an ASD diagnosis or not, the future is not a given just because your child doesn't have.
In other words, the child still has to be developed, still has to be nurtured, still has to be cared for like anybody else.
That's right. And, so when we find out our child is not normal, don't get so bogged down by that term and not having that term applied to your child that you forget that truth. I don't know what the future is for
that's right.
child. So I might as well go ahead and face today's reality and adjust my expectations to what it's going to take to get through today and the recent, the near future, And then as a person of faith, put the rest in God's hands, but also from therapeutically to just recognize that no, we don't know.
Right.
We can make decisions today that lay the foundation for a healthier future.
Right.
But we don't know. And so to move forward and not get stuck in that.
Yeah.
Now, in keeping, I think this is perfect time to ask Sister Glenn's question is, so, you talked earlier about you might see a tantrum and believe the child is just acting out. She's asking, how, if any, do you discipline a child with autism?
In the biblical sense, discipline is a measurement, right? It's about holding up that standard and that rod of truth. It's not always about physical or corporal punishment. Corporal punishment for children with ASD is very, very difficult, in my opinion. And so if you live in a part of our country, the country where corporal punishment is not necessarily something that is seen as bad, right? Or if you live in a part where it's seen as terrible, what I can speak to for the child with autism is imagine if they have that auditory delay, right? And you've just told them what not to do, or they're gonna get spanked. But there's that auditory delay, and they don't have any understanding of what they just did. They all of a sudden, I'm just getting spanked, right? It can really complicate things and make things really confusing. However, can you discipline a child with autism? Yeah, you have to. And we use a process called extinction. We ignore, it's called, we plan to ignore those behaviors we don't want to see, because you need to understand why the child is doing what they're doing, right? And so if they want access to something, the child says, I want a cookie, if they're verbal, and you say no, and the child falls to the floor and starts rolling around crying and screaming. In a lot of instances with kids with ASD, they've had that communication deficit. This is what they did to communicate, I need something. And, then mama says, okay, do you want milk? Do you want a cookie? Do you want a brownie? Do you want whatever. They're giving them these options, and this child stops screaming. When you hold up a cookie, they take the cookie. And so as that verbal behavior increases, as that understanding increases, a child asks for a cookie, you say no, they fall to the floor, start rolling around crying and screaming. It's almost counterintuitive to the way, particularly here in the South, a lot of people discipline, right? You're just going to ignore that behavior completely. You're going to demonstrate that is not the way to get access to what you need, because I'm not going to attend to it. I'm not going to lecture you. I'm not going to scream at you. Children with ASD learn from experience more than they do from instruction. Experience is the one true way to kind of shape those behaviors for these kiddos with ASD, because it doesn't matter where that deficit is, right? Doesn't matter if it's a deficit of emotion, a deficit of verbal behavior, a deficit of auditory, whatever it is. You got to help them experience what is appropriate. And so that's how you start shaping that. They ask for a cookie, they act out, you leave it alone, you walk away, you and they don't get the cookie, right?
Right.
Period.
Right.
They also don't get a spanking for throwing a tantrum, right?
Right. Right.
And then you positively reinforce the behaviors you want to see.
Well, the hour is gone.
Just like that.
And we didn't get to.
Sorry.
No.
I talk a lot, y'all.
No. I think we are being well informed.
Absolutely.
My big takeaway is the spectrum piece. Is the
spectrum is huge.
Right? It can be of extremes.
Yes.
Another one is the ignore. The one that he just said is the ignore, planned ignore, which is powerful. Which I think can also work on our children too. If you know, you use them for attention, you don't give them attention. You know, it stifles it.
Yeah.
Pastor Gibson, what's your takeaway tonight?
Autism is not the result of bad parenting.
Yes, that was powerful.
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway is that it's not an indictment on your parenthood.
That's right.
Right.
Or your humanity, and that it allows you to, that don't beat yourself up.
Right.
And that's my takeaway. It's just, dive into it, like you said, Mr. Smith. Dive into it, embrace it for the reality that it is right now.
Right.
And how do we navigate from right now to not yet?
Kamala, what was your takeaway?
For me, the takeaway was just the idea that we need people again.
Yes.
That's where Michael started,
Yes.
Somebody asked for support.
Yeah.
We can't do this on our own,
Yes.
nor should we have to, right?
Yeah.
And so that was my biggest thing, that just like with anything else we've talked about, that again, we see the need for people.
That was powerful. Desreen Glenn and Keisha Heel will be our winner tonight. Anna, all you have to do is head over to kwministries.net/claim your prize and fill out that stuff, and we will have your gift for you. Thank you so much for participating. Those of you who just listened, we thank you. I know that we usually comment on some of the other pages, so I've been checking and I didn't see anything come up, so I know I didn't miss anybody over here tonight. Mr. Smith, we're going to give you the last word. We want to say thank you very much for being willing to do this. I'm hoping that if we call on you to come back with a part 2 to talk to us about how to prepare our church for this and how to be church friendly, you'd be willing to come back and have that discussion with us, as we wanted for that to be a part of our conversation tonight and just didn't get to it. Would you please share the last word with us?
So I would say, just to kind of follow up on that plan to ignore negative behaviors or behaviors you don't want to see, that it's important, that it'd be important for the family, for those people that are doing it, to remember you're ignoring that problem behavior. You're never ignoring the child.
Very good.
You're ignoring
the behavior,
not the child. And then to positively reinforce the behaviors you want to see on a regular basis. And that goes back to that idea of humanity.
Yeah.
That place of, no matter what I have to radically accept about my child's ASD, there is always something to celebrate. There is always something about this child that should be elevated and appreciated and loved and celebrated.
That was good. That was good. I think that's the perfect way to end it. Hey, if it's Monday night, you're live with
KW
and Jay.
Peace.